Today I'm going to continue my role of doing Amstrad CPC games with very low frame rates. And the game I'm going to play is Seymour Stuntman, or Stuntman Seymour. I thought I'd done this game already. What I actually did about 12 years ago now is this version of the game when I didn't own a copy of this game, and I played it by loading it up via a CD and just holding my camera up to a TV in my living room to record it. So I can do a better video now. I have a real copy of the game and I can capture my footage on my real Amstrad CPC that I've had since about 1988. One Seymour loading. Of course it's loading from a cassette tape, so it loads up the loading screen line by line. It was a bit of an eye-opener buying a Commodore 64 under ZX Spectrum, because the Amstrad was my computer growing up. So I thought that was just what computers were like. And the Commodore 64 and the ZX Spectrum are very similar, but they're also a bit different. And their loading screens always load up a lot faster than Amstrad ones do. And I think that's just because the Amstrad sets aside more of its memory for screen memory. And so it just basically takes more data to fill up the screen. Here we are, Stuntman Seymour, and this is a pretty normal title screen for a computer game. Pretty text heavy. But this is one of those small budget games that squeezes all of the game into RAM. But actually 64 kilobytes is alright for a simple game. I mean, early NES games were less than 64 kilobytes. I think even some Mega Drive games were less than 64 kilobytes. I know, or maybe just Columns. I think Columns is 64 kilobytes. I could be totally wrong there, it could be bigger. But anyway, yes, let's start the game. Here we are in a CJ's Elephant Antics style platformer, and everything is as you would expect if you know what the CJ games are like. Yeah, it's exactly the same. The enemies turn into items and sometimes they turn into bombs. Pressing down on the controller or the joystick will make you throw a bomb, but you can also shoot. This is supposed to be a movie. In fact, this is supposed to be a Western style movie, which is just like Wild West Seymour. And Wild West Seymour is a much better game than this, so I probably could have done a video of that instead. I don't have a very good track record of keeping my promises when I'll say I'll do a certain game next. I think when I did Turrican 2, I said I'd do Mega Turrican next. And I did play the game, but I just didn't make a video out of it. Let's be honest though, this is all very lazy stuff really. I mean, it's very late budget software for a somewhat niche home computer. But I say niche, it's not really niche actually. There was a lot of home computers out there, and I mean a lot of home computers out there, and in terms of 8-bit, the Amstrad was the third best selling, and it didn't sell as many units as the ZX Spectrum, but to be fair, it was a lot more expensive than the ZX Spectrum. And in the end, Amstrad took over control of the Spectrum hardware market, so Amstrad was releasing Spectrums and Amstrads from about 1986 onwards. So Amstrad was very big into computers, and the Amstrad CPC was really just its first range that they kept going for a while. This particular game came out in 1992. It was like the year of the death of 8-bits. You can sort of see that there's a very specific time when that 8-bits died. I remember the very last Amstrad Action magazine that we had was Christmas 1992. Funnily enough, that had a preview of Wild West Seymour in it. It had like a special feature of the making of Wild West Seymour in that magazine. But that was Christmas 1992. I think by 1993 shops were starting to just replace 8-bit home computers with consoles. And so companies could still make games, but there wasn't anywhere to sell them. But there were still a few games that were being sold in 1993, and I think magazine ads always had lots of games for sale. So perhaps the death of 8-bits only really started when magazines stopped being sold. Oh, that bomb looks so slow, doesn't it? I haven't really talked about the game yet, have I? I did this game already, but it was just a very, very old video where I loaded the game up from a CD. I discovered you could convert tape images into audio files. That was basically the game data that would have been stored on a cassette tape. And then you could burn that audio to a CD player. And then you could use one of those little cassette tape to MP3 thingies that people used to put in their old cars. You could, believe it or not, you could actually load up a game like that. It was a bit of a convoluted way of doing it, but I just wanted to try out games on real hardware. And to this day, I still like playing games on real hardware. But I just wait until I can find a real copy of the game before I play it nowadays. So I have lots and lots of really interesting games to do videos of, and I also have some pretty shitty games to do videos of, like this. Although actually, I don't really think this is a bad game. I think it's just a bad port or bad conversion. It's a bit of a workman-like game. But it's obviously a Spectrum port. It's not really the Amstrad's fault that it had lots of games like this. It was just a sort of a side effect of having a machine that was quite similar to the ZX Spectrum. But the Amstrad was better than the Spectrum. It was most certainly a better machine. The Spectrum was so much simpler that games ran faster on the Spectrum than the Amstrad. With a few exceptions. I read what happened is that people realised they could get 2 paychecks basically by making 2 versions of the same game, and they might not necessarily get a lot of extra time to do the Amstrad version once people realised you could port a game over in about a week. I've read that the Oliver twins would make the Amstrad version of a game first and then port it over to the Spectrum, and they got so efficient in the end that they could do it in one day, and so they'd get double the money or double the royalties at the end of it. So I suppose it's a lucrative business, but I mean, you don't really get good results from it if you go from Spectrum to Amstrad. So I think we're getting quite close to the end of the level now, and it's taken absolutely ages to get there, and it really shouldn't have. The Seymour character was created by accident, because the company Big Red was working on a game called Movie Land Dizzy, and then the Oliver twins saw it and said they really don't want Dizzy to be in a modern setting, and they wanted him to only be in a fantasy setting. To get the game made, instead of changing the whole game, they just changed the character. Oh god, look how slow this guy is. Damn, well, he was slow, but I was slow as well. I discovered there's a cheat for this game. If you hold down the keys SONJA and press the fire button, then you're invincible. So I quickly got back to the boss, and at the very least we can see what the second level looks like. I did a video of this for the Commodore 64 as well, and it's a pretty typical Commodore 64 game, all things considered. You can imagine it runs at 50 frames per second, and the graphics are redrawn. Got some more work in a new film of the same palette. So this is a pirate ship, this one. I'm underwater here, aren't I? I think after a while you do get used to how slow the game is, actually. There is a slight benefit to that does make the game easier. But unfortunately it's very easy nowadays to just get a different version of the game. At the time, if you'd bought this in 1992 with pocket money and you only had an Amstrad, then you'd probably get some enjoyment out of it. But today, if you're that kind of person, like me, that's just curious about playing these old games, fine, buy a copy, but sometimes these games can be quite expensive, so don't waste your money unless you really want to. And so that's Stuntman Seymour for the Amstrad CPC. Thank you for watching.